Boop. Happy Monday. Today is Monday of Holy Week. Yesterday was Palm Sunday, and so we are making our way towards Easter. Today's daily Bible readings come to us from Isaiah 42, 1 through 9, Psalm 36, 5 through 11, Hebrews 9, 11 through 15, and then John 12, 1 through 11. And if these sound familiar to you, that's because these are the readings for Monday of Holy Week. And so the Revised Common Lectionary and the daily Bible readings, when we get to big times of the year, like, Easter and Holy Week and Christmas, Ash Wednesday, all the big important days, it's the same readings year after year, but then everything else kind of moves around other than that. So anyway, today's readings, I'm going to look at Isaiah 42, 1 through 9. Last year, I think I actually looked at John, the passage from John, which is 12, 1 through 11. But I'm going to talk about Isaiah 42, 1 through 9. And I'm going to talk about no screaming. It's interesting when I look this text up, because one of the things I do, because it's the Wesley Center, is I always look and see for the texts for the day, if John Wesley ever talked about them or dealt with them or preached on them. And sometimes you hit a lot, and then like he did a whole sermon on it, and sometimes it's just kind of a passing reference in something like a letter. Like today when I looked this up, I found that he had referenced Isaiah 42 verse 2 in a letter to a preacher, and it wasn't like a warm fuzzy letter either. It was a disciplinary letter. He was chastising this preacher, and I think it was like 1775. And the interesting thing is, like, this dude was all the way in North America, right? Like what would become the United States. So this is 1775. This is right as everything's starting to break loose in North America and in the colonies. And he's chastising this preacher because he was doing this kind of crazy thing, and Wesley had heard about it all the way in England. So what was he doing? Well, unfortunately, he was a screamer. He was screaming when he preached. So he'd get up to preach, and then he'd just get so into it, he'd start screaming. And I don't mean just, speaking loudly because they didn't have PA systems back there. I mean, like, apparently just really screaming at the top of his lungs. I'm sure in his heart of hearts, he thought he was, being greatly moved by the Spirit. But everybody else was just like, dude's a screamer. We got to do something about this. And so they wrote letters. It's not like, today they probably, people in the congregation probably would have been recording it and posting it to YouTube and stuff like that. And John Wesley would have seen the social media about it and just freaked out. Now apparently they had to write letters to him. And I'm guessing, too, that other people had addressed it to him, but he just felt like, no, I've got the Spirit, and this is what the Spirit leads me to do. So he was a screamer, and it was such a problem, like I said, that the word had made it all the way back to good old John Wesley, back in good old jolly England. And so Wesley had pens this letter, and like I said, here's the thing. It was the second letter. He had already written him once about this, and the guy hadn't stopped. And apparently, a matter of fact, the guy had actually written back to him and said, told him he was wrong, which Wesley addressed at the end of the letter I'm talking about today, because Wesley's like, you're stubborn. Anyway, so, but in this, he cites Isaiah 42, verse 2, and refers to the nature of Christ, in whom we all do this work of proclamation. Everybody who says their pastor, we're doing it in the name and in the order of Christ. Like, we're following after him, right? And so Wesley's quoting Isaiah here that, we in the church take to be this like proclamation of who Christ is and who Christ will be. And the verse there says, he will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. And so Wesley's citing this, and the word there is kekradzatai, right? It's kradzo is to cry out or to call out. Is to cry or to call. Ek, which is the prefix here. I know it doesn't make sense. I had to remember kind of some stuff, but kekradzatai means to call out, to cry out. So it's not just, as Wesley points out, Wesley is kind of blunt with it. Wesley doesn't go into all this. Wesley just says, he said, realize this, the meaning of that word, the force of that word is to scream. And so he's saying, even Jesus, as important as this servant's message is, that Isaiah is saying that that is going to be proclaimed. Even that servant that Isaiah is talking about, who we understand to be Jesus, wasn't going out and screaming, And he goes on to say, he's like, take me for an example. I might speak loudly because I have to. I might speak up and I might speak forcefully, but I don't scream. So utchattanooga, no crying out, no screaming. There's no screaming, no crying out and preaching. No screaming. But that's the servant that we're called to serve, that we're called to follow. That's the servant that Isaiah's talking about here. That's the servant that we are remembering, whose passion we're remembering this week and whose life we're remembering this week. He's the strong, silent type. He delivers a strong word, and he delivers it in a way that people will hear, with force and with strength, but not in a way that drives people away from the message. And, I'm reading this letter and I think, well, John, you're kind of like just proof, like pulling proof texting out here and just kind of cherry picking your sermon for it, or your message to this guy. But then I thought about it and I thought, well, he's not really wrong, and actually kind of gets to the point, because we as people who are called to go forth and proclaim the good news of Christ. And I know you think that's just a preacher's job, right? Like, it's just my job. But if you follow in Christ, you're really called to go forth and proclaim his message as well. It doesn't matter if you're not a preacher, quote unquote. You're still called to proclaim his message. And we're called to proclaim it in such a way that all the force and all the import of it is delivered to the crowds, but not in a way that just makes it look foolish. And you might think that what you're doing satisfies the Spirit, but you may just be distracting from the actual message. Because if Christ remained silent in the midst of his passion and just let the word stand for itself, maybe we got to remember who we are and who we're serving, and remember this song of the strong, silent type of servant, and remember, no screaming. Anyway, that's the DBR for today. We'll be back tomorrow. Go out, enjoy the day, have a good one. Boop.